Hello, welcome to Research Insights with Elite Mind Academy. So these are our weekly live conversations where we are covering a variety of topics from organizational well-being industry, and specifically the topics that often stay behind the closed doors. And today we're talking about pronouns. So it is a very controversial topic. And it's definitely one of those things that have to be addressed in the right way. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to see the questions, to see the engagement, to see what happens. And how are you doing, Valentina?
Yeah, well, I'm excited to have this conversation, I think, because we've been talking about it a bit internally at work. And so I'm really excited to kind of talk about it a bit more publicly and hopefully get questions, observations, reflections from people who are tuning in. So please do comment and share your thoughts. We're doing this very much to open the conversation so that we can hear perspectives that aren't included within our workforce.
Yeah, definitely. So as Valentina mentioned already, and some of you already know that we are currently engaged in a research project to hear the voices from diverse people to make sure that we better understand all of these unmet needs in organizational well-being industry, where we understand what are some of those specific issues that companies are not aware of that they need to address, and what are some of those things that are sometimes with the best intentions cause harm because businesses don't know what is the right thing to do. How does the good look like? How do we do the right thing, and how do we do things right? So definitely, as part of that research, we were also discussing, how can we role model that inclusion to others to make sure that we hear those voices and we attract them, that we use inclusive language, that we are open to those discussions. And I have to say, I'm very proud that we are a very diverse team, even though we are a very small team. Some of our profiles, experiences are really diverse. And therefore, we have to role model what we want to create inside out. So as part of some of the inclusion discussions, we had some recommendations to display pronouns next to our names. And there was a lot of noise about this, and a bit of a disagreement in our team, where we thought, well, some people are not willing to do that, and others definitely see the benefits of that. And we had this very open conversation, to really actually understand how each other person is feeling and why we're feeling so strongly about this, and how can we, despite our differences, how can we still be inclusive and respectful towards each other and still work together towards the same goal, right? So we thought it's so important that some of those conversations, in most businesses don't happen. And when the way we were navigating that conversation, we thought we need to bring it forward, right? We need to open it up to the wider audiences to see how can we navigate some of those more difficult topics, and how to be inclusive in a right way. How to make sure that some of our initiatives doesn't necessarily kind of backlash and cause the opposite and maybe alienate someone else. So Valentina, and actually to kind of also open this, me and Valentina, we also have different opinions about this. So as you can see, Valentina has pronouns included in next to her name, and I don't. And we are very much aware of that, and we understand the pros and cons of this. So maybe let's start with that, right? So Valentina, what are the benefits of sharing our pronouns, and what are the benefits of what are the right ways of kind of demonstrating the inclusion? So please share.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, first thing to say is that I think overall, whenever we meet something that seems compulsory or is put forward as compulsory, we usually don't like that, and because we don't like to be told what to do without understanding why. So, I think for me, the purpose of using pronouns, or part of the purpose, is to open up conversations like this, and by bringing it up as well in meetings and things like that. It's to open up conversations and not necessarily to mandate any particular behavior. The reason I include my pronouns in email signatures, Zoom calls, any kind of opportunity where I can visibly state my pronouns, I will choose to do so. And the reason I do that is because it is a demonstration of allyship to the trans and non-binary community. And I think that in doing that, it can make people feel more comfortable expressing their identity, or potentially talking about the identities of partners, friends, families that might be trans or non-binary, or essentially don't fit within our idea of the gender binary system. And the reason I think this is useful is because we are constantly communicating our gender identity in a lot of implicit ways. We do that through the language of the gender binary that we already live in terms of our clothing, our physical appearance, our names. There are all sorts of signifiers like that. We're already doing it. So we're already communicating our gender identity. And I like to include my pronouns so that there's also a means for talking about or communicating gender identity in a language that doesn't rely only on the gender binary and the associated characteristics from our cultural history. I think it's important to provide that space, because otherwise often, there can be a lot of mental harm and harm to well-being and mental health within the trans and non-binary community if people feel that to be understood or to be accepted, they have to manage and shift and mold their identity to fit a system that doesn't actually make space for who they are. Yeah. And so for me personally, it's a very small cost when compared to the potential positive benefits. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think I definitely agree with that to the extent because of course it's so important to show that it is a safe place. And let's say by Valentina displaying her pronouns there, she is showing that everyone is welcome to do that. And it's very often it can be very awkward to have some of those discussions about pronouns and the need to kind of correct somebody else when, they refer to you in a way that maybe you don't like. So this just opens up that safe space as everyone is okay to share those pronouns. And this is how I'm showing that. Now, for me, the reason why I choose not to have them is because the way I see the whole diversity and inclusion and some of the cases, where things go wrong, is that I think especially recently, some of those inclusion initiatives can lead to a bit of kind of tokenization, right? And people are being seen for that label, right? And to me, I think I don't want to be known just, that I'm just a woman. I don't want to get specific role because I fit some diversity box. I don't necessarily want to attach that part to my identity in the way that is too defining to who I am, right? And that's exactly the same reason why, for example, I don't even include my education, all of the credits of memberships and qualifications that I have after my name, because to me it's the same, right? I don't want to be known just as somebody, who is defined by my qualification or by my knowledge, by my gender, whatever that may be. I prefer to look at things beyond that and to see each individual for this unique, beautiful person who they are, regardless of their race, gender, identity, education, qualification, all of those things, right? So I think definitely it's a difference in approach, but also then in that case, if I'm choosing not to display those, then how do I demonstrate it in the right way, right? How do I still show that, I still support diversity. I am still inclusive person. I am still not going to discriminate anybody for having the pronouns or for displaying some of those characteristics that are sometimes hidden right behind those closed doors. So definitely, I think, Valentina, what are some of your thoughts on that? And, is there anything else as well? What are some of the ways to demonstrate the inclusion and respect and the freedom to express ourselves, without necessarily, needing to include those pronouns there?
Yeah, so I'm kind of just reflecting on what you were first saying about not wanting to necessarily lead with these identity characteristics of your gender or looking at your qualifications even. I mean, I do think there's a very big difference between your gender identity and qualifications. Qualifications are something that you obtain as a kind of a choice. It's it's something that comes later. Your gender identity is something that's intrinsic to you. And I also think that, with that, we are, like I said, we are already showcasing our gender identity in many ways. And so for me personally, adding pronouns and giving the choice for, or kind of creating an environment in which someone feels they have the choice and the opportunity to share their pronouns doesn't differ too much from what I'm already doing. And I think that when we talk about wanting to, we want to demonstrate that we are inclusive and that all identities are welcome in our working environment, and that you will celebrate all identities in the working environment. How, you ask a great question. How does somebody know that they're going to be met with inclusivity? And that's, for somebody to put forward a part of their identity where they haven't already seen multiple displays to say that they will be accepted is a big risk. This is, for a lot of groups within society, they are constantly facing microaggressions and a lack of acceptance and a lack of space for their identities within society, but also within the workplace. And to risk feeling the hurt and the harm from that, again, just to test and see if someone will be inclusive about your identity, is enough of a barrier to stop someone from bringing their whole self to an environment. And so I would like to kind of find those displays. And for me, a very easy one is placing my pronouns, because I feel as though I'm already communicating a certain level of gender identity. This just allows me to do it in a language that also gives the opportunity for others to express their gender identity when it might not be represented through these traditional other means, and where it might fall outside of a gender binary. And when thinking about other ways to display that, there's obviously behaviors like using gender neutral pronouns before we know somebody's gender identity, and to create kind of policies and practices that recognize the impact of hormonal treatment, for example, on your experience of work. But I think, for me, I see using pronouns as such a kind of low effort intervention to start that process of changing your kind of outward communicated message about inclusivity and the identities that you welcome.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important to be able to have multiple ways to demonstrate this in a way that resonates with different people, in a way that, we show that, we are an inclusive company, we stand for our values and beliefs in a right way. For anyone who's listening, would love to hear any, questions, comments, what do you feel are some of the concerns around, using gender pronouns at work? What are some of your experiences, either personally or maybe sometimes from needing to support someone? What are some of the concerns and issues that you are facing? And I think definitely, thank you very much. We are seeing some more comments coming up here. It is so important to normalize some of those gender pronouns and Amy saying there's a lot of pushback, particularly with non-binary one. And exposure can reinforce the message that, all the pronouns are normal, right? It can be used with our everyday language easily. And, they, them, it's been in our history, in our language for centuries. And yet, it has not been, used in our current society that is very kind of masculine, feminine, and kind of puts people in a box. And I know Valentina also mentioned before, things like uniforms, right? If you think about this, and from some of our conversations that we are having with people, uniforms cause a lot of issues because the uniforms come in standard forms and shapes of male and female. And if somebody who's maybe trans, somebody who's going through hormonal therapy, or maybe someone who actually doesn't identify with either gender, that creates a lot of issue because now you have to choose something that is not congruent with you and it is not representative of who you are. So also, we really need to, sometimes I think it's some of those actions that can really show the inclusivity in our approach to diversity, the way, we introduce some of the uniforms, the way we include conversations about pronouns, the way we use this gender neutral language in so many different areas, right? So from recruitment to, internal communications, to making sure that, again, all of our kind of team communications are also aligned with that and kind of inclusive. And this is not limited to pronouns, because even if, throughout recruitment, for example, there are specific words that will resonate more with specific genders and specific roles than others. And if you are using those words of, ambitious and powerful and influential, it's most likely it's a very masculine language to use, and those words are resonating with, typical white power males, right? So there is a lot of language as well that has to be considered in how exactly this person is seeing themselves, right? How are they resonating with, what is the language that resonates with them, and can we really understand their needs, understand their pains, their desires, and we can feed some of that language into our job descriptions, into our communications, to make sure that we are really inclusive and not just using words that are only resonate at emotional level with, specific type of gender or identity.
Certainly. And I think just kind of coming back specifically to around the use of gender pronouns, I think I'd like to kind of just highlight, thank you, Rob, for your comment about saying that it's not about her or it's not about me, it's about the invitation to others. And I think this is a really important thing to recognize, is that we aren't, when we try and engage in practices that create a more inclusive environment, we have to be in the practice of decentering our experience and centering the experience of the people that we are trying to support and give space to. And again, thank you, Simon, Jacqueline, and Amy. Exactly, if it kind of opens, if getting into the practice opens up just space even for one person to feel more comfortable expressing their identity through their gender pronouns or in multiple ways, then for me that's worth it, because that's about their experience. And if I can positively contribute to their experience in that way, then I would like to. And also, I think that it's something that is communicated in kind of widely and with, like I said, little effort. Whereas, where we definitely want to think about how we're using language generally, and the kind of gendered associations of that language. But leading that is our pronouns. We all use pronouns, we use them all the time. So it's not that we're deciding to do something that we're not already doing. We're just expanding something that we are already doing to include identities that aren't included in the current system.
Yeah, and in the way how already, like Valentina mentioned, and I think some of you also, included, Simon, Jacqueline, again, it's a little it's a very simple little thing to do, right? And when we're thinking about, let's say, understanding the language, the wider context, there's a lot of research, there's a lot of education, there is a lot of information and knowledge that is required to, let's say, make sure that all of our communications and job descriptions and adverts and so on are inclusive. And it's not that easy to do. So in comparison, pronouns is a very, very small, easy little thing to do to show that it is okay to share, it is okay to include those pronouns.
Absolutely. And I'd kind of just as well like to highlight Amy's point again. So there's often can be pushback, particularly with non-binary they, them pronouns. And part of that can be things like it's difficult to integrate grammatically sometimes into a sentence, or it's not in our kind of natural lexicon. And so it feels like an effort. And I think that that's important to recognize. It is an effort. It is uncomfortable, and it's unfamiliar to change and make changes in our society, and that can feel uncomfortable or difficult in a working environment, in our behaviors and our actions, but also internally in our own experience. And I think it's really important to investigate within ourselves, where is this pushback coming from? Is it coming from a place of I don't want to have to make the effort? And I think it's important to hear that voice, because that, we are asked to consider others and consider a lot of different things. And sometimes we can feel like, oh, this is another thing I need to learn, and it's difficult, and I don't know if I have the time and energy for it. And that's an emotional reaction to this experience, and I can understand that. But I think with that, there's, as a cis person, I've gone through life fairly conveniently with my gender identity. I haven't really had to put much effort into managing it to fit other people's expectations. And that is a huge, huge privilege. Whereas trans people and non-binary people have to manage their identity on the day-to-day to fit other people's expectations of them. And that requires constant effort. And if I can take just a bit of that effort and carry that out myself so that they don't have to, then I would like to do that. And I think that, it's about weighing up the cost versus reward. And like I mentioned with this, I feel that the cost is quite small and the reward is quite big. So it can be worth it.
Yeah, I think it's very, very important what Valentina is highlighting here. And I think here what we often see that, of course, it is very difficult to kind of be constantly this kind of a role model and stand out there and fight for this is who I am, and kind of constantly needing to prove someone and convince them and educate them about how to speak, how to be inclusive, and so on. And I also, it is a lot of effort, and a lot of companies are also, I have to say, sometimes with good intentions, but they actually exploit those vulnerabilities of people by creating these so-called model minorities, right? So you are representative of this minority group. We want you to be that role model to represent, diversity, inclusion in our company. Show us how to do this the right way. Go and speak to everyone about it. Go and, put that brave face on and, be yourself at, 10x kind of thing. And not everyone is comfortable with that. And some of those individuals, not everybody, and some of the conversations as well, we've been having that, people from those minority groups, not everyone wants to bring that part of themselves to work, because they are not ready. They don't feel comfortable. They want to keep their personal lives away from work. And by somebody putting this onto them and saying, now you have to do this, and, or help us, and, really showcase this and be this role model for diversity and inclusion, there is a lot of pressure. There is even more expectations on this person to now do this on behalf of the company. while they are already doing a lot of things on the daily basis, they're having those conversations, they're facing somebody else doing mistake with their pronouns, not referring to them in the right way. So there is already a lot of difficulty. And therefore, what we believe in, that this inclusion has to come from, like Valentina said, from one of those privileged employees, right? We have to educate ourselves. We have to really take that next step to showcase that we are here to support them, to hold them, rather than just, putting one representative of that minority on a pedestal and say, hey, you now have to demonstrate this, because sometimes that has an opposite effect, because it creates too much of a gap, right? The person who is minority is now advocating more and more and more, to the point that it can even start to drive away some other minorities, because they say like, oh, I'm not comfortable doing that at work. So it can be also alienating for other different people, and it puts a lot of pressure on those people who are saying, you are now responsible for making our workforce inclusive. So definitely there are so much more that we can do to make sure that environment is inclusive, and that everyone owns that bit of an effort to showcase our inclusion and diversity, rather than putting back onto those people to be more.
Absolutely. And I think you've really highlighted a very important point here, is that this problem of tokenization and kind of exploiting diverse identities to demonstrate a company's diversity and inclusion is exploitative. That is exactly what it is. And that's exactly why I feel that it should be the people who it doesn't have the same weight or triggers involved to make those efforts. And I think you also raised an interesting point there when you say that, some people don't want to bring that part of their identity to work. And I would ask, why? Why do they not want to bring that part of their identity to work? And is it because they feel that it's not going to be accepted and there isn't going to be space for it? Or they're going to experience things, like you say, like tokenism, like, microaggressions and difficult questions. And I would say that it's the responsibility of other people to create a culture and perpetuate a culture whereby, exactly like you say,
where it is okay to do so. Yeah,
it is okay, and we're learning and we're educating ourselves and making sure that we take that responsibility on personally. We don't wait to be educated by the people who are being discriminated against.
Yeah.
And just to, I think Omar has raised a really interesting point in the comments. Is there a way to cultivate a society whereby pronoun declaration is totally normalized but not mandated or expected of everyone? I think there is, and I have a really positive experience of this. And so I'll kind of share that from my working experience. I worked in Brighton from 2016 to 2020. And it's very commonplace, and especially in the places that I was working, that people would include their pronouns in their email signatures, in conversations. It would be normalized to just ask like, oh, what pronouns should I use for you? Or in trainings and events, you'd introduce your name and your pronouns and your role, maybe whatever identifying, if you felt comfortable, whatever identifying information you wanted to. And it became, because it was adopted by so many people within these organizations, and it became such a part of just normal practice and culture, it became totally unconscious in my behavior and in the way I conducted myself. Even just things like whereby if you don't explicitly know what somebody's pronouns are, not using their appearance to make that judgment, or their name, just using they, them. And I've noticed that since moving back to London and working in roles here where there's less of a culture around inclusive gender identities or inclusivity with gender identity, that those habits at times can slip. And that's because I'm within a different environment and I'm responsible for holding that a little bit more. And that's how I think. So that's why I kind of believe quite strongly in doing these things, these small acts, to just create that subtle culture change, because I think that is how we can normalize the experience of using pronouns, or just essentially accepting and opening our minds to different gender identities without mandating it.
Absolutely. I think this is definitely such an important point, that the environment, can really make a whole difference. And, Simon here, commented as well that, often when minorities groups feel comfortable speaking out, it acts as a catalyst for others to do the same. And absolutely, I think it's so, so important that we have that freedom and that environment and that culture that supports your choice to speak or not to speak, right? So it's very important that you have a freedom to do that, and knowing that by choosing to speak out, by choosing to, role model and bring your identity expression in that environment, will be valued and respected. And that is really, really crucial. I think also, my point that I was trying to make with, this kind of a model minorities is not that it is bad per se. I think it's definitely very good to make sure that people are advocating and people are speaking out, and there are some people who will, of course, want to do that, and it is their choice. I just wanted to highlight this kind of fair balance between, wanting to do it and creating that as a safe space, and being kind of pushed to do that as you have to. And as soon as you kind of declare your identity that it's somehow different, then employers are already putting you into that box that, yeah, great, you're gonna be that representative, you're gonna be that voice. And that's that expectation, that what can prevent some other people from opening up, because some other people, they would love to bring that identity to work, but they don't necessarily want to be that leading voice in fighting and encouraging everyone to do that, right? So I think it's again, identity and our kind of gender expressions and so on, they are so personal. And what does it take for one person to share their experience, and what does it take for other person to share that, can be really, really varied. So how can we create the safety for everyone to make sure that it is safe for everyone, that your expression is valued in all the shapes and forms. However, it's never a mandate, right? So showing it that it's, well, just because now you declared this, there are no consequences for this, either good or bad. There is no, external pressure on expectations for you to comply with some other, duties, norms, rules, obligations, just because you have now declared that identity. So I think that's the kind of the fair boundary to watch, is like to, and maybe that's a question for everyone to put out there. How do we balance that, right? Because we want to create that environment when everybody's free to speak up, and we want some advocates who are really living, breathing role models for how to do this right, and helps to build that environment. But how do we make sure that it's not also imposed onto others and to those who don't necessarily want to do this, right? So how do we create that safe culture in a right way? That's a very, very big question in organizations.
Certainly. And I think that kind of just going back to your point about, if people are asked to essentially then represent their identity group, or an element of their identities, and represent the wider group of that, you're right, that's puts a huge amount of pressure on essentially the people who are being discriminated against to change the system of discrimination, which is wrong. And it should be, in fact, that people who are benefiting from that discrimination are the ones that should be changing it. However, I do think it is really important to make sure that people who are experiencing this discrimination, that it's their voices that get heard. So if essentially creating an environment that encourages and empowers people to speak up, not asking them or directly mandating for them to do so, but encourages them to do so, because exactly like Simon says, it acts as a catalyst for others to do the same. And I don't think that anyone would see somebody with, say, a protected characteristic speaking up about their experience and think, oh, I now don't want to share my identity because I think I'm going to be asked to do the same thing. I think that is a far, far, far smaller proportion to the proportion of people who see that as a gateway into actually talking about their experience. And I also, going back to what you're saying about how do we create in these environments that make people feel more able to bring their identity into a space and share what their experience of discrimination is. And I think having these conversations openly is a big part of that as well. Just looking at Simon's comment here, that is a big problem I see a lot in the workplace when a minority voice is sought to informing planning policy, etc. And there is an expectation that because someone identifies as a particular way, that they will support without proper remuneration, whether financial or otherwise. And that's also a really important point to raise, is that we can't just expect people, because of the virtue of their identity, to then act as a point of expertise. You know, for any other expertise, you'd pay a consultant who is a professional, and that's their role. Whereas, sometimes we can get into this habit of saying, oh, you have this identity characteristic, what do you think? And you're right, it puts a big pressure on people to be experts in their identity and to advocate for a group, when they might still be working out how they feel about their identity, finding the language to talk about it, reconciling, you know, the unconscious bias that they will have been experiencing their whole lives, and the effect of that being internalized. So I think it's kind of tying it back a little bit to pronouns, is that if that's a way to create space for voices to be heard, then it's, which I think it is, then I think it's an easy thing to do. And I think that it's, you know, this point about not making it a mandate, I think is really important. So I think that it's important to have these discussions and talk about it and explore why somebody might not want to engage in this way and might not want to kind of put forward that part of their identity, or to not express their identity in that way. That's an important discussion to be had, and the point is to have the discussion. It's, you know, we don't want to shut down any particular opinion here. It's about leaving it open so that we can better understand each other and our needs.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, freedom to have those conversations, right? And create that psychological safety to discuss those uncomfortable topics and have this inclusive culture where, you know, it's okay to share, it's okay to have those conversations, and there are some of those you know, reprimands and you know, costs now as a result of you having had open up. And like you mentioned, Valentina, that again, and I think in relation to Simon's point, right, that now we are expecting, you know, those people to be those representatives and feed that information. And absolutely, it is important to hear those voices. It's important to ask people, you know, how they really feel, you know, what they really struggle and so on. But it's very important that we are not putting that pressure onto them to to be those experts in a way. It's up to us to hear those voices and make sure that we weigh up, you know, what are the costs of this person really opening up and sharing, you know, what are the benefits of them, you know, and how do we include them, how do we reward them, how do we, you know, acknowledge their contributions in a way. And I think with that, what is really important as we are discussing, you know, how do you create that inclusive culture, that there is actually a big difference between inclusion and belonging, which, you know, sometimes we kind of, you know, talk about this as, you know, diversity, inclusion, and belonging as a, you know, one and the same pot, where actually there are differences. And inclusion really is an action. Inclusion is how we demonstrate the inclusivity, expression, freedom for every person to be themselves. And it is really about an action that mainly actually comes from the privileged people, right? How inclusive we are to welcome others who are not like us, you know, how inclusive we are to hearing opposite opinions, how inclusive we are in accommodating different ways of working, how inclusive we are in hearing all of these, you know, struggles and actually do something about it, right? Now, belonging is a feeling. So inclusion is an action, but belonging is a feeling that then the individual feels as a result of all those actions, right? So I can feel I belong here, right? Belonging is knowing that I can be myself. I resonate with this group at the level of values, at the level of beliefs, and I'm not gonna be somehow disadvantaged by being myself, right? So I think it's very important to know that, when we are encouraging kind of people to take specific actions and so on, let's kind of consider this difference in a way that what actions do I need to take so that people feel like they can belong here and that they can be truly themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good point. And it ties in a little bit with Amy's comment here about creating a truly inclusive culture. So one where people do feel that they actually belong, rather than, that the people around them are just adopting practices and policies without really understanding what they mean or what their intention is. And saying that, it's not, if a company is hiring queer people, I mean, which it should be, you have a responsibility to self-educate rather than be educated by the employee. And a really good point here about creating ways for employees to provide anonymous feedback. So I think that is a really important system to have in place. So embedding that, and it kind of ties into your point, Steve, about how to best institutionalize these changes. Having practices, procedures, policies that embed this kind of behavior around how to demonstrate inclusivity and how to create a sense of belonging, and embedding that in policies and practices in ways like having anonymous feedback, giving people the opportunity to share their experience, is really important. With anonymous feedback, though, in very small organizations, it can be not that anonymous, which is also a bit of a hurdle as well. So I think it's very important to have the option for anonymous feedback, while at the same time creating an environment in which somebody can share, not anonymously, their experience, and know that they're going to be heard, and know that their experience is going to be valued and listened to, and engaged with and actioned as well, rather than kind of just having a lot of feedback taken on and saying, oh yeah, I hear that, and not seeing any changes.
Yeah, and definitely, in relation to Steve's point about, how to kind of really embed this into HR and kind of institutionalize some of those changes. I think what is very important, that this is not something that, and we can see this happening so often, is that companies kind of do this kind of one-off launch initiative, here is a talk, maybe here is, some education, maybe there is one-off workshop, there is, some sort of, here are your rainbow lanyards, but those are kind of like one-off initiatives, but actually they don't necessarily embed change in all of our ways of working on daily basis. And that change has to happen by first understanding the needs of our employees. So like Valentina said, it's very important as well that it's done confidentially. And most of the time, the benefits, where we derive most benefits from this, it's when it's done by an impartial party. And I think that's the reason why, as well, as part of our research right now, we are offering companies just that, right? We are offering to do all of these confidential needs analysis and questionnaires. And people are much more willing to open and share some of those concerns, because they know that it will stay behind the closed doors, but actually the message will get heard without this in any way coming back to them again or against them personally, right? So it's really, really important to protect and to make sure that those voices are being heard. But the second thing, that once we've heard those voices, now how do we make sure that it's embedded in every process through employees' journey, right? From hiring to firing. So from how we are providing for those needs, from the moment we are putting a job advert out there, from the way we're conducting our interviews, from the way we are assessing, whether this person is right for the job, and all throughout the communication channels. And I think as soon as the person is already in our workplace, what is very, very important as well, that we have a communication policies that includes how exactly do you communicate in an inclusive way, because this doesn't come to us naturally. Most people have no awareness or knowledge how to do this right. So we have all of the, let's say, company channels, right? Emails, Slacks, LinkedIn, whatever that is that you are using for a company to communicate. What is very, very important that we produce communication guidelines, how exactly you communicate in all of those channels inclusively, and you demonstrate do's and don'ts, that if you do this, this is the effect that it might have on these type of people. Because sometimes we hurt others because we simply don't understand that what we said and what we have done has that kind of impact on someone else, right? So, there's so much discrimination at work, but it's very rare that it's actually being done intentionally and purposely. Most of the time, it happens because of ignorance, because people don't know and don't understand the other person's perspective. So if we really educate everyone about the points of view and the experiences and the feelings and emotions of other people, we can really kind of start to break down some of those boundaries where now we're needing, just this one advocate to, to speak about this. What about we speak on behalf of everyone else? So it creates that safe culture. Imagine the first time you create your Slack account, you receive a little guideline saying, hey, these are the rules how to use it in an inclusive and respectable way. These are do's and don'ts. And these are the reasons why we ask you to communicate this way, because this is the impact that it can have on these other people. And I think that's really the way to do this, right? And if we are assessing this at every stage of our communication, how can we prevent this from happening, right? What is the worst kind of unintentional abuse that could happen at every stage of the process? And what are the steps that we can put in to prevent this from happening? And it can be a lot of work, and that's why we're offering that support to businesses, because not every company has a budget and resources to pay consultancy 20 grand to come in and do all of the assessments and strategies and review all of your policies and produce all the recommendations, right? So we are in a privileged place where we have funding to be able to do this research. So if you feel like you would benefit from that, please reach out to us, because we can really help. And again, at the same time, we are also learning throughout that process, right? Because the more research we have, with the more voices we hear, we always hear some more things that we haven't considered before, and it changes and it evolves, and of course it's so important to continue doing that. And it's never done process. We should always continuously evaluate how our environment, what impact it creates on employees, and how our employees are really feeling, all of them, right? With all of their identities, feelings, emotions, whatever they are. And we need to have a constant feedback loop that looks at, as we tweak this process in our company, as we adjust this policy, as we correct this procedure, how does it affect people, right? And we keep hearing, is there anything else that we haven't considered, and what else need to change at organizational level? And it's really the only way to kind of have this living, breathing ecosystem connected with the feedback between kind of unmet employee needs and the way it's being lived and breathed and informed at the company's level.
Certainly, and having that feedback loop is incredibly important within a company, so that the experiences of your employees without them necessarily having to attach that to them, and potentially have it affect their experience of work. I think that with that, it's also important though to recognize that there's also a huge amount of research and work that has already been done about inclusion and people's experiences of inclusion at work, and their experiences of existing diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, and engaging with that is really important. I mean, it doesn't take long to do that kind of self-education. Just before this, I kind of just took 5 minutes to experiment and Googled, what are the practices around pronouns and how to support trans and non-binary people within the workplace. And I found 4 to 5 very helpful articles that were all kind of a 1 to 2 minute read each. That's a very, very small time commitment, and that's something that we can do frequently. So having a communication policy, an inclusive communication policy, I think is really important, and it also sets out kind of the standards of the organization, and kind of it communicates within the communication policy the values of the organization as well. And within those policies can be things like, what these, like Simon mentioned as well, it's often the relatively simple things that tend to have the biggest impact over time. Simple things being, how to change culture within teams. So suggesting team meetings, line management meetings, shared lunches, bringing something from your culture to those, or bringing a family member, spouse, acknowledging days of significance. So religious holidays that aren't Christian holidays, trans and LGBTQ plus pride, disability pride. All sorts of initiatives like this can just really help create that culture that is what people actually feel on the ground. So having the policies and the procedures and practices is a very important way of kind of codifying what these practices of belonging or of inclusivity are, so that people feel that they belong. But it's the experience of actually making sure that they are done and they are embodied by employees and within the working practice and the culture that creates that feeling of belonging.
Absolutely. So, we see that sometimes organizations have policies and procedures, but actually their reality looks very far from it, right? And it's not embedded in the culture. And I think very valid point here from Simon as well about, some of those celebrations, right? You can see companies are always having team Christmas parties, right? Why are we not having, Christmas party for everyone based on some other, cultures, religions, and so on? Why don't we celebrate all of them, right? Why don't we include all of them in equal way, and it's all very easy to say, you can take your time off work and go celebrate whatever you want to celebrate. And as a team, we're still going to celebrate, Christmas party or whatever that might be. So I think some of those simple things definitely can make a very, very big difference. It's like, are these experiences, are these individual traditions, are these individual cultural norms are respected on an equal level, and are they being treated equally in organization? And we sometimes don't think about this because, well, this is maybe the background that I came from. This is what I know. This is what I'm aware of. So therefore, I want to include everyone in that. So I will celebrate that. And by doing this, we are not thinking how it excludes some others. And, how can we make sure that we are then acknowledging, if Christmas is important for me, what is important for that person? Let's all celebrate as well as a team, and really bring that into work rather than saying, you can take time off to celebrate some of your, traditional celebrations and so on. So, it's there is a lot that can be done, but it's definitely not easy. And of course, we need to review our policies and procedures, but it's the level of education and the way how we educate people, from the way we onboard them into the company to say, this is the culture. And, there is something that from our team, we are always saying that we don't believe in a culture fit, right? If you think that this is our company's culture, then everyone has to be the same. Everyone has to fit in. You want to recruit for the culture add, right? And create the space where people can be comfortable to be themselves. And you want people to be different because it adds, different ideas, different points of view, different problem-solving ways, different solutions that it brings to your innovation and creativity in a company, right? So how can you create that, right? Can you create the culture that is truly, truly inclusive and really, really diverse, rather than saying this is, our company's culture is this, and you either fit in or you don't, right? So I think how can we demonstrate this from the recruitment point of view, right? It's like, it's not about, people just fitting into the culture, but can we be inclusive enough when that person with differences come into the culture? Are we creating for them an opportunity to add value? Are we creating them safety to be themselves? Are we creating an opportunity, for their individual experiences to add value to our organization?
Certainly. And I think it's important with that to recognize the benefits for everyone involved of encountering different ideas. The fact that we're having this conversation now is a product of having different ideas in our workplace. And it's something that I feel very grateful for, that when we have a conflict or a disagreement about something, that this is how we approach it and how we handle it. And I love that. And I think, though, we do need to be careful with, in terms of not having necessarily a company culture and kind of welcoming opinions and perspectives, all opinions and perspectives, is that we still don't want to be giving equal value and equal prevalence to discriminatory opinions as we are to inclusive opinions, or to the experiences of people who are discriminated against. And that's quite
absolutely. And I think here, very often we approach, I think this whole space requires a huge shift in mindset from, like Valentina mentioned, who is this benefiting, right? Because we often think that for me to be inclusive, this gonna benefit that person who I am including, right? But actually the benefits of including that person are huge for the company, for the team, because by not including that person, I am losing out. So if I have a business, if I have a company, and I am not including those voices, I am losing out by not having that different point of view that covers my blind spot. I am losing out by not bringing that different point of ideas and creativity and cultures that can really drive innovation forward, that can really create a very, very different ways of working, if we know how to bring diverse people together. So I think we really need to kind of shift away from, inclusion and diversity is for the person who's being included. No, this is for the company, for the longevity and the strength of the business, for the brand, for the strength of our innovation. And it's really future-proofing the company from that perspective. And I think if we are really positioning it in that way, it's much easier for us to get the buy-in from top leadership. I don't remember, someone mentioned their comment, like saying those things have to come from the top. They have to come from leadership. And if we take it into that mindset, what are the benefits for the business to bring this diversity and inclusion? Then we are having a very different conversation, and the shift of mindset is probably a nice way to end on. And thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. It's been really, really interesting to hear your comments and thoughts, and I really, really hope we'll have many, many more those kind of conversations. And thank you for everyone for contributing, for sharing thoughts and feedback. And please let us know if there is anything else that you would like us to discuss, if there are any other topics that you would like us to bring forward, and to create the safe space for conversations. But also just a reminder that we are at the moment engaged in this research project where we want to hear more of those diverse voices. And if you are an individual who's listening and you feel like, I have something to share that, or I have some of unmet needs that my businesses are not providing for us, but I'm not feeling confident to speak to my employers, please speak to us, because we can create that safety. We can hear those voices, and we can make sure that it's included in those national guidelines where everybody knows how to do this right and how to do the right things. And from the business's point of view, we can really help to to bring those voices into your policies, into your practices, to review how things can be done, and to facilitate some of those conversations. So you don't have to be expert in everything, right? And you can just focus on doing your best and connecting those different puzzle pieces in HR. So yeah, we will share some more resources, links in a comments as well. If you would like to have any other support, please feel free to reach out to us and let us know. And yeah, thank you for listening.
Absolutely. Thank you, Evelina. Thank you, everyone who has participated and commented today. Really, really appreciate your engagement, and it helps kind of us understand what everyone else is thinking, but it also helps drive interesting conversation between us. So yeah, just really appreciate it, and do get involved with the project if you can.
Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week, same time, the same place. But very different and interesting topics. So see you there.
See you then.
Have a good week. Bye.